Today we're going to take a look at doing this effect where the skin is eroding away and we can see through to the 3D skull behind the skin, which matches the person's movement. So this might be a pretty simple erosion effect, but the sky's the limit on what kinds of effects you can do with these techniques. There are a bunch of ways to approach this using a number of different softwares, but we're going to be using Syntheyes and Fusion in this example. If you only want to use Fusion, I did a video a couple of years ago that I will link below on actual 3D object tracking with inside of Fusion, along with a couple other videos I think you might find useful that show you different techniques and ideas. If you'd like to follow along, the assets will be listed below. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do this object track of the head. And we're going to do that in Syntheyes. But one of the things I wanted to take a look at was I was watching a video recently. I think it was Matt Wolf or one of these other guys that they do a lot of new AI tools. And one of the tools that they were talking about was being able to take an image and create a 3D mesh from the face. I'm not a big fan of AI when it takes away the creativity, but for things like this where I need a mesh for the face so that I can project on it. Will it be perfect? Probably not, but it's going to be good enough for the effect. So the first thing we'll do is let's get our mesh first. So one way we could do that is first off, let's reset this composition. So we're starting over. And go over into Fusion, and then let's find a good frame that's like straight on, something like this. And all we have to do is right click and do save image. And once we save that image, then we can come and take a look at one of the tools. So this is one of the tools. This is the first one that I found when I searched. This is the first one I found, was called Face to 3D. You can see the link right up here, imageamigo.com, Face 3D. And all you do, take an image, our still frame, drop it in. You can see there it's uploading. Once it's done doing that, you can see it now, it's scanning it. Okay, and now we have this model, this face model that we can use. You can download that model and then we can use it for our 3D tracking. And then you end up with a face model. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good looking map. I think the nose might be a little too big, but hey, whatever. You get this nice little 3D mesh and we can use this for 3D tracking. So let's go over into Syntheyes. First thing I want to do is this side of the face is really dark. So if we hit P, you can get into the image preprocessor, and under the color tab and the mids, let's bring that down just to brighten it up a little bit, and maybe that'll help with the tracking. Press OK. Next thing we should do, we want to do an object track. What we can do is go over to shot, add a moving object, and so now you can see this little diamond there. And this is going to be our object, and you can see right here, active tracker host is now an object. And what we'll want to do now is go over to camera under the solver, and we don't want this to be solved, so we can just disable it. We'll just leave the camera where it is, and we're only going to solve the object, and we can leave that at automatic. So next thing we need to do is track this guy. I'm going to use a rotoscope just so that it only defines the head. We can do that. Let's go to the first frame, go to roto masking, and let's add in a spline. The first point you pick will be the center of the spline, and then we can just make a shape around his head. Right click to finish it off, and by default this is automatically keyframing. So I'm going to go to the end, grab the center, move it over, and then we'll just keyframe this real quick. Okay, that's pretty good. And let's go through, just make sure. Okay, I think that's pretty good. We're going to need to take this garbage map and we want to change it to object. So only the object is going to only track with inside this spline. So now we're ready to start tracking. So let's go over to the features. Let's go over to advanced, and over under big blip size, I'm going to move this up to 30. That way we're getting a range of small to large tracking points. Okay. And then let's blip all frames, and that'll give us a whole bunch of tracking markers. To find the tracking points, instead of looking at all this, you hit peel all. And if we go over to the solver, you can see all these green diamonds, and these are all the trackers that it found. So we can go ahead and hit solve and see what happens. Press OK. Okay, and you can see we have an object track for sure, but we need to clean this up. So we can do a quick cleanup by going to track, clean up trackers. Yeah, just hit fix. That get rid of some, hit go. Okay, and so now we're under 1, so we've got some pretty good trackers. Let's go to the quad view. I want to get rid of a lot of these trackers right here. So select basically all this stuff in the background. I just kind of want the front of the face because that's all that really matters in this. And then we want to get all these off the beard. Let's go to the camera view and take a look. That one right there, I don't know if I like. And these two, that one, I'm getting rid of some of these on the beard because the hair is sticking out further than the mesh. The skin is actually going to be right in here for the chin, where this is out on the beard. That one there we don't want because it's out past. Yeah, I mean, even this one's out a little bit. I'll leave that one because it doesn't have to be super duper perfect for what we're going to do because we're going to project, but we want it to be pretty close. Okay, so now that we have that cleaned up, let's delete our solve. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to actually use the mesh to do our solve. So now let's take a look at how we can do that. So let's go over to perspective, zoom out a little bit, and let's bring in our mesh. And then let's just bring this mesh up, go to the 3D tab and go to scale, and let's scale it up. And that's probably okay. It's hard to see through the mask, so let's bring the opacity down so we can kind of line this up. And so what we want to do is we want to use this pinning technique. If you don't have this on, you can come over here to the toolbars and turn on pinning. And the pinning, we can line up this mask, and we're going to do it from this perspective, straight on. So what we're going to do is we're going to line this up perfectly, or as best we can, in this view. And then we're going to take all these 2D trackers and we're going to project the 2D trackers onto the mesh from this camera angle. And that will force the trackers to be constrained to the mask itself and help with the solving. Okay, so let's go over to the edit pens. And before we click in here and start moving this around, one of the things we want to do is turn off the field of view is fixed. This is something that you might run into when you're doing 3D tracking, is that you do a 3D track, everything looks great, and then you bring in a 3D model and it just never works out. And a lot of times that can be because of the focal length. We're going to use this. We want to have this change. So as I pin the model, it's going to change the field of view so that the 3D object matches well with the camera. Just on a side note, this is a great way to try to figure out your focal length. If you have no camera information, you can use this technique to help you with regular 3D camera solves, and I've used it many a time. Anyway, okay, I've gone on enough about that. Let's try to line this up. So you just click and you can drag it, and then you can move these around by touching just on the purple triangles. Okay, so now that we have this lined up, we can turn off the pinning. That's pretty close. And what we'll do is we could either select all of the trackers and then project them, or we can just pick a handful, which I think is the way I'm going to go. So I'm just going to pick different trackers. So maybe that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Kind of a little bit of a spread, and maybe that one. So let's start with those, and then let's come up here, and then under track, you have an option right here, drop on the mesh. Click on that, and it projected straight from this camera view onto the 3D mesh. And you can see that it added a constraint to each one of these points, which are constrained to the 3D space or the 3D mesh. So now when we solve, it's going to use our 2D trackers based upon the 3D mesh. So it's basically set up a set of constraints for all of our points. So let's go over to the solver, and let's hit go and just see what we get. Press OK. All right, and well, the nose is a little too big. I can tell that, but is this going to work? Let's go to camera and perspective. Looks like it went off to the side here a little bit. Why don't we, one of the things I might try is let's put on the constraints and hit refine. That popped it right in. That's a much higher error, so that may cause some problems. Let's see what happens. I think that's going to work out really well. We go back to the perspective. I'm just going to double check this. I'm going to spend a second just to check it. Okay. Now remember, we're mostly focused right in here. So everywhere else I don't really care about. So as I come here, you can see if I hit J and then turn off the seeds, we can kind of see through. Now the nose is obviously too big, and you can see it doesn't line up over here. But for here, that looks pretty solid. I think that's going to work out just fine. So now we're ready to export this out. And so for Fusion, we can just go over to File, Fusion Composition, and let's take a look at this. So I'm going to hit Default. So it's going to match frames. I think we can leave all of this. I'm going to put high Q on by default, and none of this really matters. The only other thing I want to do is export to clipboard, so let's turn that on. That way it'll copy the composition, so when we go into Resolve, not a big deal if you're using standalone Fusion. So if you copy to clipboard, then we can just paste it in. Anyway, So that's all set, and press OK. All right, great. So that has been copied on the clipboard. Let's go over to Resolve, Command V, and it says that failed to import the face object, which is fine. So we press OK. We can take the camera renderer, go in here. This right here is its own render of the footage. So I'm just going to delete that, bring our media in, and drop it into the camera. And then that warning we got was here, the face. This is the 3D object. So all we need to do here is just go browse, and we'll find the object we used. Press open, and now you can see we have our track. And we can test it out in here to see how everything's looking. Okay, that looks pretty good. What do we need here? So first of all, we don't need default light or the ambient light that comes in by default. I guess I could have turned that off. Object 1 base, we don't need that. I'm gonna delete that. And so now we're just basically, this is all we have. We have our camera, we have our object track, we have our object points, we have the object itself, and now this is where all the transform is. So anything we put into here is going to have this transformations in it. 3D scene, camera, and our camera renderer, and then out. Okay, so and now we're ready to start building our effects. Okay, so now we have the basic setup. Let's start by bringing in 3D skull and lining it up with our shot. There's a link down below for the 3D object where you can download it and add it into your scene. So there's the 3D object, and it also comes with the texture. So just drop that in and then drop that right into our object. Why don't we leave the face in there, and then let's take a look at the scene. I'm going to split the screen, and let's bring the 3D viewer over here so we can kind of see both things going on. So here's our inputted skull, and that's our face. So we're obviously going to have to change this. So after the FBX, add a transform 3D after the skull. Let's see, we'll bring it over and up. We're going to have to rotate it, something like that. We'll have to scale it down, something like that. Bring it forward, and let's see. Still a little bit smaller. Okay, that might be pretty close. You can tell right here, I can tell by looking in the viewer that it's going to have to be changed a little bit. But let's unhook the face, and then in the camera renderer, turn off the lighting just so we can see this for a minute. In the FBX mesh, if we go over to material, we can change the opacity, and we can just kind of bring it down some, just so it makes it easier for us to line this up. And then now we're going to use both the 3D and the 2D to help with us lining this up. These little X's might be a little problematic. In the object cloud, let's change those to points. It might be a little easier to, it's probably going to go right about there and up. Looks like I need to scale this up a little bit more. There we go. Sometimes you got to turn off those back faces. It makes it a little bit easier. Okay. Again, we can fix this later if we need to. Okay. So, but that looks pretty good. Okay. So in the FBX, let's go back, turn our opacity on. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now that we have the 3D skull lined up pretty well, let's set up our mask that we're going to use to reveal the 3D skull behind the skin. Okay, and to do that, we're going to copy a bunch of nodes. So I'm going to select all of these right here. So our face, our object track, our object point cloud, our 3D scene, our 3D render, and the cam. We'll just copy those, and then I'm going to bring it down here and put paste, and probably should be working in the vertical view, but I'll just leave it like this for now. And then let's set this up, the basic composition up. So I'm going to bring this down. We want to merge. So I want the media in the main clip to be in the background. Then I want our 3D skull to be in the foreground like this. And then we're going to bring this down here, and I'll bring the from the merge into the media out. And I want to use this mask right here that we're going to make to go into the mask here to cut out the area of the skull we're going to reveal. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. So in this case right here, this 3D face that we used for the object tracking actually does have UVs. A lot of times when you use some kind of tool like the AI tool we used to make this face, it doesn't have UVs. I actually added the UVs when I was correcting part of the mask. So there's a couple different approaches. If you have the UVs on here, You can actually, if we take a look at the, let's bring a renderer, bring our 3D face into the renderer, and let's make a single view. And if I take a look at this renderer and I change the render type to hardware UV, it's kind of hard to see. Let's go into the face, and under material, let's bring the opacity up. You can see I actually have UVs for the face, except it's hard for me to tell where on the face those UVs are because I don't have the texture of the face. So it's hard to tell where I'm actually putting the lines. Not a big deal if we wanted to. Let me just quickly show you this way, but we're going to use the UV map 3D for this. But if you have the UVs, what we could do is let's drop this into our object. And actually, let me put this back up. What we can do is we can take a shape, and I'll put a background, drop that into the background. And looking through our 3D render, I can tell this is the mouth. So if I get the polygon, I know I want to go around the mouth, probably up the cheek like this. I'm kind of guessing where this might be. So it's something like that. We know we don't want to go around the nose. We just kind of want to go around the eye. And I'm just guessing where that's going to be. We can drop that into the face. And then this renderer, if we take a look at the renderer, oh, it's still in wireframe. I take the face off wireframe so you can see the shape. And the opacity should be all the way up. And then we can see we have this alpha, okay? And we're going to take this alpha and use it as the mask. So if I drop this in here, you can see there's our shape. I don't need that point cloud. Let's turn that off. We have that shape, and we could just do a split view like this. Put our background over here. And then we can move it over here and see the result. So if we wanted to, we could sit here and just kind of move this around until we get the shape we want. So this is one way you could do it. I just want to show you another way if you don't have the UVs. So I'm going to delete that. And this way, what we want to do is actually, I want to bring that footage down here. One way we can do that is we can use a wireless link. And in that wireless link, let's bring our main footage right in. And so now I have a view of the original clip. And I can use this to line up, just like we did the render 3D. So I'm going to delete the render 3D. We're going to take a look at this, and then I'm going to grab a mask. And what we want to do is we want to be able to figure out a good frame to do the mask on, and then we're going to project it from that frame. So I'm going to come down somewhere, maybe around frame 120, and I can go like this. I want it to go around the nose, maybe towards the front of the teeth. Like this, up a little bit on the cheek, around here. I want the socket like that. We can select all those points, Shift S. And I want to project this from that frame onto the 3D object. And we can do that using a UV map 3D. We want to do this after the object. So this is the movement of the object. We want it after that. So we go UV map 3D, and then the UV map 3D. Let's change it to camera, and then we can use our camera in here. Okay, and I'm going to drop this into the polygon, and in the UV map 3D, what we want to do is we have our camera. We can select it if we want, and what I want is the lock UVs on animated objects, because we have an animated object, right? So let's turn that on. It looks like it's got the right frame already, so frame 120 is where I want to project from. So since I drew this shape on frame 120, it should line up perfectly. And if I click here, you can see I got my shape. And if we look in 3D space, you can see I have my projected mask, and you can see it forms right to our 3D face model. Okay, and then if we look through our render, you can see it lines up pretty nicely, and it should match up well throughout. Yeah, that looks great. Okay, so this is just another way that you could approach doing this. What are all those points? Oh, let's undo the point cloud from our 3D mask. So this is really the basic setup for being able to do any number of effects. We've matched our 3D skull up, and now we have a matte where we can cut through the 2D footage to reveal the 3D object that matches the movement. There's a lot you can do with these kinds of techniques at any rate. So I'm not crazy about this mask, but we'll work on that in a second. Since we have this nice wide open mask, this is probably a good time to do the 3D lighting on the skull so that it kind of matches better within the scene. Why don't we take a look at that? So I'm going to come back up to the 3D skull area. Let me move that cam over. So we need some light, right? split the view, and let's bring our 3D scene over here. Let's zoom out a little bit, and I can tell obviously the light's coming from this side. So let's grab a spotlight, drop that into our 3D scene. I can bring this back like that, and I'm going to use the quadratic light, and then in the camera renderer we gotta need to turn on the lights. So let's turn on the lights and shadows, and I'm going to use the render type. I'm going to do software renderer, and let's go back to the spotlight, and what we'll do is let's go to the transform, come down here, click on use target, and then we can just pick the skull so that the light is always facing the skull. And then I can move this around. I want it up. It's probably fairly straight on with him, and then we just need a brighter light. So the intensity, maybe 250. Okay, maybe a little bit more, 300. One of the things I noticed is I got that specularity, so it looks more plastic. Why don't we turn that off? So in the FBX mesh, our skull, if we go over to material, you can go to specular, and we can turn down that intensity. I mean, you can leave a little bit on there if you want. That's up to you. Bring it down like that. Okay. Okay, that's not too bad, but let's see. That's pretty good. I mean, you got the light on the front. Maybe it needs to go over just a little bit. Okay, cool. That looks pretty good. We'll leave it at that, and then if we want to change it later, we can mess around with it. Okay, so now we have a nice lighting for the 3D skull. Now let's work on this mask, because there's a few things I want to do. First of all, I don't want this smooth edge. That just doesn't look great. And I also want to erode it out from the cheekbone from the beginning. We want to be able to kind of have it erode out and spread almost like a disease or something like that. So let's take a look at how we can do that. Let's go down here, take a look at our final, and let's look at the background again. First of all, let's define the shape a little bit better. I want to bring this in. I really just kind of want the wall of the socket here, maybe a little bit more of the jawbone, so I can bring this out like this. Something like that. Maybe bring this up a little bit so it's around the teeth. So I'll start with this. One of the things I'd like to do is distort these edges so they're not so smooth. One thing we can do is soften the edge a little bit. To break up that edge is to use a displace. So I'm going to grab a displace, and we'll add that displace. We'll grab a noise and drop it in here. And then in that noise, we're going to use this to displace our matte. So we can do something like bring up the detail, something like this, bring up the scale, and you can see how it's breaking up that edge, something like that. So now we're getting like a nice kind of broken up shape. That looks pretty good. One of the things that you can do actually in the displace, if we take a look at the displace is set up to radial. You could use XY if you wanted to too. I like the radial. We can move this center around if we want in the displace, and you can see how it'll change the way the displacement is. I'll leave it around there. If you want, you can play around with this to get the look that you want. And let's see how that looks. Yeah, I mean, that's looking pretty good, right? Not bad. Let's say that that's okay. All these adjustments can be dealt with later if we need to. And the next thing I want to do is I actually want to make this erode out. So one way we could do that is let's move this over. And I'd like to let's take a matte control, and then we'll grab another noise, drop that in here. Let's take a look through here. And in here, we're going to use the gradient, and let's set it to radial. So if I look up here, I want to use this noise pattern. Actually, let me just make this single view to erode out. So I'm going to bring this over here, bring it down like that maybe. And I want this radial pattern to erode out our matte, but I want it to stay within these bounds. So I don't want it to go outside of these bounds. I just basically want an erosion that erodes out. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can do that. First thing is I want to use this black in the center to be the erosion. So, and I want all of this out here to be transparent. So one way we could do that is on the white triangle here, which is the white part of the gradient. Let's take the alpha down. So now we have just this alpha that we're going to use to push. And we can come over to the noise, and then we can start playing with this to give us a cool pattern. Yeah, so maybe something like this. And we can use over here, we're going to be able to use this offset to be able to erode out like that. So that's a pretty cool looking pattern. And we're going to use this to drive the animation. So now if I look at the Matte control, okay, I have this fast noise coming in to this Matte control. And for this to work, we'll go to the Matte control, do combine alpha. Now that's not what we want. So what we want in the combine operation is probably minimum. Okay, I think that's it. So now we're using this to drive the erosion of that object. So let's go into the fast noise, and then we can use this offset. You can see, and it'll bring up and erode out that. So all we need to do now is animate. Okay. So to do that, let's go to the first frame, bring it down so that our pattern disappears, put a keyframe, and then come down to the end, and then we'll bring it up until we reveal the entire pattern. So just like that, somewhere around there. So let's go to the beginning and let's see how that works. So as I come forward, you can see there it's eroding out. And so that's pretty cool. Let's take a look at how this actually looks in the full composition now. So we come here and go up a handful of frames. Okay, I'm starting to see the erosion come out. It's not exactly how I was expecting it to be. So split the view. We'll put this over here. I want to play with this fast noise a little bit. I wanted to start right about in that cheek. So I'm going to bring this a little bit more like that. I mean, I think that's going to work. We can play with this rotation and stuff like that to get the pattern we want. And that's all I'm doing. I'm trying to get it so that I'd like it to start right there. Maybe that's it. Well, we can play with this as we go. Maybe I need to change the pattern. I can use the seethe rate in here, or not the seethe rate, the seethe to change the pattern. So maybe something like that. And maybe bringing the contrast down. Something like that. Okay, I'm getting carried away with playing with this. For now, let's leave it like this. This is should be good enough. So now we have this kind of reveal of the skull. So then after we do that, one of the things that would be nice is to add a little bit of dark shadow in here to give it a little bit of depth. Just kind of looks a little bit nicer. And I think I want to change that lighting. It's so dark here. Let me fix that first. I'm going to bring the lighting around a little bit. I kind of want to I'd like to see a little bit more right in here. So I'm going to go back over to our polygon, click on the polygon, and let's see if we can bring out this edge a little bit. Yeah, I want to get a little bit more on that face, maybe a little bit more in here. So we can see a little bit of this, and that looks a little bit better. While we're working on this area here, one of the things I noticed is if we zoom in here, you can see right in here, we're seeing the background skin. And that's because have our main footage going into the cam. Let's take that out. And instead of having the main footage going through our 3D object scene. So if we take a look at this, just to be more clear, if I fit this, we had this in there. And so that was projecting the back image. We could just turn that off, or we can take a black background like this, drop it into the cam, and now it's going to fill the background. So now we have a black background for that emptiness that is in the skull. Okay, and that looks a lot nicer. Kind of closes that out. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. Let's get that shadow in there. So we want to like this dark edge right here. One way we could do that is by using shadow. And I don't want it there. I want it right after this camera renderer. I'm gonna drop that in here. And the shadow I want is going to be based off of this shape that's coming through here. So one way we could do that is, let's grab a filter. I'm going to add that here, drop this into the filter, take a look at the filter, zoom out here, change it from relief to sobel, and that's going to grab that edge. Okay. And if we take a look at the alpha, you can see right there, we got this nice edge, and we're going to drop that into the mask. And then if I take a look, turn off alpha. And then if we look through, let's look at the shadow, and we want to change the output from image with shadow to shadow only. And now you can see that dark edge. Now if we come over here, you can start to see a little bit of that dark edge. And if we want to make that a little bit more apparent, so we can really kind of see it, and one way to do that is after the filter, let's add a brightness contrast. And then the brightness contrast, let's turn on alpha, and then we can use the gamma to bring that up. And as I bring that up, you can see it's really starting to bring out that edge. And then we can fine tune it here with the range. So we can play around with the range. Maybe I bring the highs down and really darken it up. And now we're getting a little bit more of this depth look, and it also kind of gives you that burning look. Okay, so now we're starting to get a pretty cool look. So the last thing I want to do here is the animation here is, I don't want to wait 60 frames to really see through. I'd like to see like this start to happen probably closer to like frame 40 or so. So one of the things we could do is maybe we can, under the fast noise in the color. So one of the things I could do with this animation is, I guess I could just go right into the keyframes. Here's the fast noise, and let me change this to the lines. And I suppose I could just take this keyframe and then offset it. There we go. So that on frame 40, we're like right there. Notice at the very beginning, you can sort of start to see it. And then we're getting this erosion happen. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Okay, nice. At the end, I think I want that keyframe to be a little bit further, like that. I did, because I didn't get it all. There we go. Actually, that probably changed the whole thing. So let's go to 40. Yeah, it did. Okay, so frame 40, we're going to start to see that. So at this point, why don't we give this a render just so we can get an idea of where we are, because it's hard to tell at this point. So I'm going to render this out, and then we'll come back and do any kind of final fixes. Okay, so this is our first render. Let's hit play. It's okay. I like the erosion, looks pretty good. There's a couple things I wouldn't mind changing. Like right here, you can see these edges here. And that's probably because there's too much blur on the mask itself. I'll have to take a look at that. As we come down, maybe we want to tighten it up here. Maybe I don't want to see so much of the bottom of the teeth. I also am not crazy about the finish shape. I feel like we might need a little bit of more jaggedness with this, especially with the way that the flesh is coming open like this. I feel like the edges could be changed. Also, I noticed that the shadow in here is a little too sharp, and I'd like to soften that. So let's take a look at those few things. So the first thing we'll take a look at, let's take a look at the spotlight. And I'm going to go to the last frame. And we're going to try to fix these shadows. That should be pretty easy. So over in the spotlight, go into the controls underneath. Let's hit the softness to variable. And that smoothed it right out. Also, it might be nice to have a little bit more light here. So maybe we can change the way that looks. Let's split the view. Bring our 3D viewer up here, and maybe I want to bring this around a little bit more. I guess we can move the cone angle out. That might help a little bit. Yeah, it kind of smooths it out a little bit. Okay, and that looks a little bit nicer. Now let's fix the edge of the matte and just kind of fix this up. For example, I want to kind of move this. I don't like seeing the underneath here. I'd like to bring up this edge a little bit. So we can do that over here. Let's take a look at the polygon, and let's just bring up this edge, and maybe not so wide out here, something like that. So that's a nicer shape, but the edge here, I'm not crazy about that. It still seems a little too smooth. Let's see if we can fix that, and that we can do in this fast noise that we're using for the displace. Let's turn on discontinuous and invert it, and that right there just did a lot. This is much nicer. And we can play around with these settings here to get something interesting. Okay, that looked a little bit better. We can also use the seed to kind of like, that's kind of close, but we could use the seed to sort of play through the noise pattern and see if we can find one that we really like. Yeah, maybe something like that. And then I kind of like that shape a little bit. And then I want to see the full eye socket. So I'm going to just change right up here. We can push that edge out like that. And maybe more on this side. So you can see that this edge here. Yeah, something like that. Okay, that's looking like a pretty decent looking finish. The other thing I want to do is see this, like right over here. There's like this, I'm not crazy about the way that that is coming across. I mean, I kind of like this burned edge look. And one of the things we can do about that is let's go into the erosion. And I just like to soften the distance here between these two. So we can do that within the gradient. So here, let's take the alpha and maybe push this down. There we go. I don't mind it somewhat. I just want to get rid of that little bit of edge. And let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks a little bit nicer. I like the way that's creeping out. Okay, cool. And maybe that dark edge is too much. We can go in the brightness and maybe pull this down. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. All right, cool. So I think that's going to look a lot nicer. Let me just go to the end one more time. That'll be our finished frame. Lighting looks pretty good. I'm going to do one final render, but I think that's about it. Okay, so let's take a look at our final render. Press play. Okay, cool. That doesn't look too bad, and it's a fairly simple effect. The one thing that kind of bothers me a little bit is the smoothness here on the finish. I'd like to see a little bit more of this jaggediness over in here, so we could correct things like that. Again, down below I have a link for that tutorial by Blackbird called Sue, which does an erosion effect on letters that would make this look a lot more interesting, although this looks pretty cool for a simple effect. So the idea was just to give you a basic understanding of how you might set up these kinds of effects, where you can do a 3D object track that follows your footage and then do things like reveals to be able to see through to that 3D object and have everything line up. So this went a little bit longer than I thought it would. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.